I noticed him the moment I stepped into the museum that morning. It wasn't his clothes or his posture that drew my attention. It was the way he stood completely still in front of the bronze sculpture, as if he'd arrived early to a memory only he could see. Most visitors drifted from room to room, looking for something interesting. But he looked like someone who had come back for something he'd already lost. He didn't move until I got near. Then, slowly, he turned toward me with a polite nod, the kind that feels both familiar and out of place at the same time. There was something measured about him, something careful, like every gesture had been practiced in another life. When he finally spoke, his voice had the strange steadiness of someone who had been waiting a long time to say a single sentence. "Is the artifact still here?" he asked, glancing toward the ancient exhibit room. "They haven't taken it away yet, have they?" His words felt wrong in a subtle way, as if he wasn't asking about a plan or a rumor, but about something that had already happened for him. I told myself I misheard, but he kept watching me with quiet expectation, like he was trying to determine whether I remembered something I shouldn't. I told him the artifact was where it had always been. He smiled, not in relief, but in recognition. "Good," he murmured. "Then I'm early this time." The phrase stuck in my mind like a cold draft slipping under a closed door. Early for what? Early compared to who? I should have asked. But something in his expression, something lonely, almost apologetic, made me hesitate. Before I could speak, he walked toward the gallery with a strange mix of urgency and nostalgia, as if he were returning to a moment instead of entering a room. And I swear, just for a second, I felt like I wasn't watching a visitor, but someone drifting through the museum, the way a traveler crosses a border between two different versions of the same day. My name is Mark Ellison, and back in the fall of 1991, I had a quiet habit of spending my days off wandering the museum in Boston. I wasn't an artist or a historian, I just liked the stillness. There was something about those marble halls and soft echoes that made time feel slower, almost suspended in a way I couldn't explain back then. Most weekdays, the museum felt like a sanctuary shared by a handful of regulars. Retirees sketching near the Roman busts, students carrying notebooks, and parents trying to keep their children from touching anything priceless. I knew their faces, their routines, the calm shuffle of their footsteps. That's why the man I met that morning stood out immediately. He didn't fit into the familiar rhythm of the place. He moved with an odd sense of purpose, neither rushed nor relaxed, more like someone walking back into a place they once loved, but only remembered through fragments. I noticed how he paused at certain pieces longer than others, not with curiosity, but with certainty, as if he already knew where everything should be, even the things that hadn't changed in decades. At first, I tried to convince myself he was just another tourist. Boston drew plenty of them, after all. But there was a quiet discipline in the way he scanned each exhibit, as though he was comparing the room to a memory. And when he finally turned to me and asked if the artifact was still here, something tightened in my chest. The question didn't sound hypothetical. It sounded late. I didn't understand the weight of his words until much later, not until everything unfolded exactly as he seemed to expect. Looking back now, I realize he wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was checking a timeline, and for reasons I still can't piece together, he needed me to hear what he had to say. "Hi, my name is Mark. If you're enjoying the story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. What kind of strange memories or moments out of place have you experienced in your own life? Thank you for being here and supporting these quiet, mysterious stories. Now let's get back to the story." I didn't go to the museum that day expecting anything different. It was a gray Tuesday, the kind of Boston morning where the sky looks like the underside of a wet blanket. I remember checking my watch at the entrance, 9:42 a.m., and thinking I had the whole quiet building to myself for a few hours. I saw him again near the ticket desk, standing off to the side as if he wasn't sure whether he belonged in line or somewhere else. Most tourists came in with maps, cameras, or at least that look of half-distracted excitement. He had none of that. Hands in the pockets of a worn jacket, shoulders drawn in just a little, head tilted like he was listening for something only he could hear. Our eyes met for a second. There was no smile, no nod that time, just a look that felt searching, as if he was trying to place me in some mental list he'd prepared long ago. I walked past him and headed toward the main staircase. I told myself to forget it. People looked strange all the time in a city like Boston. But halfway up the stairs, I heard his footsteps behind me, steady and unhurried, matching my pace without rushing to catch up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Do you know if the Ancient Artifacts Gallery is still on the second floor?" I stopped on the landing and turned. Up close, he looked younger than I'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, but there was a tiredness around his eyes that didn't match his age. His hair was neatly cut, but not in any style I could tie to a particular decade. His clothes were the same way, neutral, chosen specifically not to stand out. "Yeah," I said. "Second floor, to the left. It hasn't moved." He nodded, studying my face more than my words, like my answer confirmed something beyond simple directions. "Good," he said softly. "So they haven't changed it yet." There was that word again, yet, carrying more weight than it should in such an ordinary sentence. "You've been here before?" I asked. A faint smile tugged at one corner of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You could say that," he replied. "Though, I remember it a little differently." He stepped past me on the stairs, but not in the normal automatic way people move around each other in public spaces. It felt deliberate, like he was careful not to brush against me. I fell in behind him, more curious than I wanted to admit. The gallery was quiet as usual. Glass cases, muted lighting, small plaques with dates I rarely read, and the distant echo of footsteps from other rooms. It was the kind of place where time already felt slow and layered, full of things dug up from lives that had ended centuries ago. He walked straight to one of the central displays without hesitating. No wandering, no scanning. As if he still remembered the exact layout from a visit that mattered more to him than to anyone else. The case he stopped at held a single item, a small ornate object, older than any date I could comfortably imagine belonging to one person's lifetime. "There it is," he murmured, almost to himself. "Still here." I stood a few feet behind him, watching the way his posture changed. His shoulders seemed to loosen, but not from relief, more like acceptance. As if a possibility he'd been afraid of had just been ruled out. "You really came just to see that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't look at me right away. His reflection in the glass hovered over the artifact, a faint double image. When he finally spoke, his voice had that same careful tone I'd noticed before. Every word weighed before it left his mouth. "I came to see if history is still on schedule," he said quietly. "And if you're still here to witness it." The words landed on me with a strange, delayed chill, like a draft finding its way under a closed door. In that moment, I didn't know which part unsettled me more, the idea of history having a schedule, or the implication that somehow I was part of it. I didn't answer him at first. I couldn't. The weight of what he'd said didn't fit anywhere familiar in my mind. People didn't talk like that, not unless they were joking, confused, or trying to sound dramatic. But he wasn't joking, and he wasn't confused. Whatever he was, drama wasn't part of it. His tone had the calm certainty of someone stating a fact he'd verified more than once. "History? On schedule?" I finally repeated. He stepped back from the glass, his eyes tracing the edges of the display, as if checking for changes an average person would never notice. His posture was thoughtful, almost respectful, like the artifact was a living thing he didn't want to disturb. "Yes," he said, "some events you can shift, most you can't, but a very few, play out the same way no matter how many times someone tries to alter the path." I stared at him. "Are you saying you knew this was going to be stolen? That's what you meant earlier, right?" He turned toward me with an expression I still can't fully describe. It wasn't smug, it wasn't fearful. It was something in between, like a person who has lived through a moment too many times to feel surprise anymore. "I know it will go missing," he said. "I don't know if stolen is the right word. Some words don't apply neatly to things that don't belong exactly where they are." There was a murmur of voices from the hallway, a pair of students walking past the entrance. He waited for them to leave before he spoke again, lowering his voice. "I've been here before, Mark." My name on his lips hit me harder than anything else he'd said. I hadn't introduced myself. I was sure of it. "How?" I started. He gestured subtly toward the artifact, cutting me off. "There's a version of this place, of this moment, where you and I spoke longer than we will today. You asked me questions. You didn't believe half my answers. You shouldn't have. But eventually you saw it with your own eyes. And when that happened," he paused, as if choosing his next words with surgical precision, "it changed the way you remembered everything. My pulse hammered under my skin. The quiet museum suddenly felt too small, every sound amplified. The hum of distant lights, the creak of the wooden floor, the soft exhale of the air vents. "You're telling me we've met," I said. "Before today. We've crossed paths," he said. "But meaningfully meeting, only happens once." I felt a faint shiver crawl up my spine. He spoke with such steady conviction that arguing felt pointless, almost childish. Still, I forced myself to find grounding. "Look," I said, "if this is some kind of trick or—" "It isn't," he whispered. "And you know it isn't. You felt it the moment you saw me." I wanted to deny it, but the truth was embarrassingly simple. He was right. There had been something about him from the start. Something that made my thoughts snag like a loose thread catching on a nail. He stepped past me again, but this time he halted halfway, turning so he could watch the exhibit room entrance. His expression sharpened, not with fear but caution, as if he expected someone else to appear. "They'll move it soon," he said, his voice quiet but tense. "Not today, but soon. And once they do, everything that follows becomes harder." "Harder for who?" I asked. "For everyone involved," he said, "but especially for you." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" He hesitated, and for the first time since I'd met him, his composure cracked just a little. A thin line of uncertainty appeared between his brows, not from confusion, but from memory. "Because in one version of this moment," he said, "you saw something you weren't meant to see, and you stayed." He glanced down. "In another, you ran." I felt my throat tighten. Ran from what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back at the artifact again, hands loosely clasped behind his back. "There are things," he said softly, "that don't make sense until you're standing in the middle of them. And even then, the understanding feels borrowed, like someone else lived it first." He shifted his gaze toward me again, eyes steady, unreadable. "But whether you run or stay, that part hasn't settled yet." A lingering silence stretched between us, heavy as dust in a sealed room, and somewhere inside it, I realized something unsettling. He wasn't just predicting an event. He was remembering one. He moved away from the display, drifting toward the next gallery with the kind of soft steps people use when they're not sure whether they'll be welcomed or stopped. I followed at a distance, not because I trusted him, but because his words felt like threads pulling me forward. Something in me needed to know what he meant, what he remembered that I hadn't lived yet. The adjacent room was quieter, dimmer, almost like a holding space between time periods. Framed maps, pottery fragments, half-erased timelines etched onto plaques. Objects that once belonged to hands now long gone. The kind of room where a person could disappear without making a sound. He paused near a display of faded manuscripts protected behind thick glass. They looked fragile, yellowed at the edges, ink barely holding on. He studied them with the wary expression of someone double-checking a memory he wasn't certain he could trust anymore. "You said you've lived this before," I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't echo. "What does that even mean?" He exhaled, not a sigh, but something closer to weariness. "Imagine you're walking a road," he said quietly, and suddenly, without warning, the ground shifts beneath you, not violently, just subtly. Enough that the version of the road you were on is no longer the only one. I frowned. "You're talking in riddles." He looked at me then, really looked, and there was a tenderness in his expression that startled me. "No," he said, "I'm trying not to frighten you." A shiver crept up my arms. "Then say it plainly." He tapped a finger lightly against the glass, once almost absent-mindedly. "There are timelines that fold back into each other," he said. "Loops. Misalignments, moments where two paths overlap just long enough for someone to step between them. And you step between them," I said, though it sounded like someone else had spoken with my voice. "In a sense," he replied, "though step is too intentional a word. Most crossings aren't choices. They're symptoms." "Symptoms of what?" He hesitated, as if trying to decide whether the truth would do more harm than good. "Of being in the wrong place at the wrong moment, or the right place at a moment that wasn't meant for you." My pulse quickened. "So, what am I? A right place or a wrong moment?" He almost smiled. "Both," he said softly, "which is why I need you to pay attention." I wanted to laugh. Out of disbelief, out of nerves, but his tone pinned the reaction to my throat. There was no joking in him, no uncertainty either. Only the quiet resolve of someone who had waited too long to reach a moment they still weren't sure would unfold the way they remembered. "What does any of this have to do with the artifact?" I asked. He walked toward the center of the room, where a tall glass case displayed a collection of carved figures. He didn't look at the figures. His attention was on the reflection, the way the light bent around him. "The artifact is a marker," he said. "A fixed point. Something that doesn't shift even when everything else does." "A fixed point in what? Time?" He nodded once. "Call it whatever you want, but when something fixed moves or disappears, it creates ripples. And those ripples aren't always predictable." "And you think that's going to happen soon?" "I know it is." He paused, "because I've seen the version where I arrived too late." Silence settled around us like dust. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear the distant sound of a tour group in another wing. Children's voices, someone clearing their throat, shoes scraping softly against the floor. "And what happens in the version where you were too late?" I asked. His eyes softened with a sadness I didn't expect. "Someone takes it," he said. "Someone who shouldn't have been able to." "Who?" He met my gaze with an expression that made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. "Someone I couldn't stop. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here at all." The air in the gallery suddenly felt thinner, as if the walls had pulled closer. "And why tell me?" I whispered. "Why involve me in any of this?" "Because," he said, voice low and steady, "in every version I've seen, you're always standing here." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle into me like cold stone. "And what am I supposed to do?" I asked. He took a step toward me, and for the first time since meeting him, there was urgency in his eyes. "Remember," he said, "no matter what happens, Mark, remember what you saw, even if the timeline tries to take it from you." And before I could respond, he turned away, leaving me with a feeling I couldn't shake, a sense that something was about to happen, and that I had already lived it without knowing how. I didn't see him for nearly 10 minutes after that. He drifted away into the deeper galleries, leaving me alone with a rising unease I couldn't swallow down. The museum had always been a quiet refuge, a place that slowed my thoughts, calmed me. But that morning every sound felt charged, as if the building itself were holding its breath. I wandered back toward the central halls, trying to convince myself I was overthinking. Maybe he was just strange. Boston had its fair share of unusual characters. Maybe he was obsessed with old objects, or maybe he'd read some rumor in a newspaper. Maybe he guessed my name from something I said earlier without noticing. No, none of those explanations held. The truth pressed against the edges of my mind. He knew me. Not in the present tense, but in some other tense I didn't have grammar for. I stepped into the Egyptian gallery, where the ceiling arched high above the displays, and light filtered down in dusky gold. A few visitors were scattered around, an older couple whispering near a stone tablet, a young woman sketching the outline of a sarcophagus. Normal scenes, ordinary, comforting. But then, as I turned the corner, I saw something that stiffened every muscle in my body. He was standing near the entrance to the restricted wing, an area usually closed to the public, marked by a velvet rope and a sign that read, "Staff Only." He wasn't touching it. He was simply watching it, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening for something on the other side. And he wasn't alone. A guard stood a few feet away, arms crossed, gaze fixed on him with polite suspicion. "Sir," the guard was saying, "that area isn't open. I'll have to ask you to step back." The tourist shifted his weight, not confrontational, but not apologetic either. "I know," he said calmly. "It won't matter soon." The guard frowned. "It matters now." I walked closer, trying to appear casual, though my heartbeat was thudding so loud it felt like it echoed in my throat. "I'm not trying to enter," the tourist added. "I just needed to confirm something." "Confirm what?" the guard asked. The tourist didn't answer. Instead, he turned and spotted me. His expression brightened, not with joy, but with relief, like a man who'd found a familiar landmark in a foreign city. "Mark," he called, as if we were old friends. "Could you come here for a moment?" The guard glanced at me. "You know him?" I hesitated. I didn't want to lie, but the truth was complicated. "We spoke earlier," I said. "I thought he was just looking for a specific exhibit." The guard didn't look convinced. "He's asking questions he shouldn't know to ask." "What kind of questions?" I asked. The guard lowered his voice. He wanted to know the exact schedule for the artifact transfer next week, and the route. My skin prickled. The tourist watched me quietly, hands clasped behind his back, as if waiting for me to decode something hidden in the moment. Why would that matter? I asked, eyes on him. Because, he said softly, that's when everything changes. The guard stepped between us. Sir, I'm going to have to escort you back to the public areas. The tourist gave a faint nod, not resisting. Of course. But as the guard touched his elbow to guide him away, the tourist leaned slightly toward me, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear. Don't be here during the transfer, he whispered. You won't like the version where you stay. A chill surged down my spine. The guard led him down the hall toward the central rotunda, leaving me rooted to the spot. For a long moment, I didn't move. I stared at the staff-only door, the dim corridor beyond it, the faint hum of the restricted wing's temperature controls. Something was waiting there, something he had seen in another iteration of this moment, something I wasn't meant to encounter. Finally, I forced myself to breathe and followed from a distance, trying to understand whether he was warning me or preparing me for something inevitable. Because for the first time that morning, I felt the truth settling in. Whatever was coming wasn't about the artifact. It was about me. I followed them at a careful distance, keeping far enough behind that the guard wouldn't assume I was part of the problem. The tourist didn't resist, didn't argue. If anything, he moved with the guard like someone being escorted through a memory instead of a building. His gaze drifted across the museum's corridors, not with curiosity, but with recognition, as if he was comparing details to something only he had seen. They stopped near the rotunda, where a tall marble statue towered over the mosaic floor. The guard gestured toward a bench along the wall. Please wait here, the guard said. I'm calling a supervisor. Of course, the tourist replied, sitting down with surprising ease. I would never want to interfere. The guard walked off toward the front desk, leaving us in a temporary bubble of uneasy quiet. I stayed several feet away, pretending to study a display case while keeping him in my peripheral vision. But he didn't look at the artwork or the other visitors. His gaze was fixed on the empty stretch of floor between us, as if he were watching something invisible unfold. After nearly a minute, he spoke, quietly, without lifting his head. You're wondering why I know the transfer schedule. I didn't answer, but he must have taken my silence as confirmation. Because in another version of this day, he continued, I tried to stop it. Stop what? I asked softly, glancing to make sure the guard was still out of earshot. He lifted his eyes toward me, and in them I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not fear, not madness, but exhaustion. The disappearance, he said. Not the artifact going missing. The moment everything shifted. I stepped closer, just enough to hear him clearly. You said you'd been too late in another version. Too late for what exactly? He inhaled slowly, as if preparing himself. In that version, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when the artifact moved, it created a breach. A small one. Brief, barely noticeable. His voice lowered. Unless you saw it. A breach in what? I asked, though my chest had already begun to tighten. In the timeline, he said softly. A fold. A slip. A moment where the world misaligned by a fraction. He paused. You saw the fracture open. Most people never do. Most people can't. My pulse quickened. What did I see? He looked down at his hands. Something that shouldn't exist here. Something that belonged to a different iteration. I swallowed hard, unsure if the room felt colder or if it was just me. Around us, people wandered peacefully, tourists checking their maps, an elderly man adjusting his glasses, children pointing at the statue's shadow. No one seemed aware that the ground beneath their lives might be thinner than they imagined. What happened to me? I asked quietly. He met my gaze again, and this time there was unmistakable sorrow in his expression. You vanished, he said. The word hit me like a physical blow. Vanished how? I whispered. Like, died? He shook his head. No, not died. Not in the way you're thinking. He searched for a different word but couldn't find one. You slipped. Into the fold. Into the misalignment. Part of you stayed, part of you didn't. It's hard to explain. Harder to witness. He rubbed the side of his jaw. I saw it happen. I still see it when I close my eyes. That's why I tried to come earlier this time. A chill rippled up my spine. This time? I repeated. How many times have you? Enough, he said softly. enough to know which moments are fragile. The guard rounded the corner again, now accompanied by another staff member. The tourist straightened, hands resting calmly on his knees. "They think I'm a threat," he murmured. "But I'm not here to harm anyone. I'm here because I couldn't watch you disappear again." The supervisors approached with the cautious posture of people ready to defuse a problem. "Sir, we're going to need to speak with you privately," the older supervisor said. The tourist rose to his feet. "I understand." But before they led him away, he turned to me one last time. "Mark," he said quietly, "you're standing too close to a moment that doesn't stay the same. Please, don't be here during the transfer." The supervisors guided him toward the administrative offices, and he didn't resist. He walked with them peacefully, almost gratefully. I stood frozen in the rotunda, heart pounding, watching him disappear around the corner. For the first time since meeting him, I realized something terrifying. He hadn't come to protect the artifact. He had come to protect me. I didn't follow them. I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the cold mosaic floor of the rotunda, as the tourist and the supervisors disappeared behind a wooden door marked "Staff Use Only." The museum's quiet hum filled the silence he left behind, but it didn't calm me. If anything, it made the tension inside me coil even tighter. For a long moment, I simply stood there, watching the door, half expecting him to walk back out and say something else. Another warning, another fragment of a future I wasn't sure I believed in. But the door stayed closed. Eventually, the world around me began moving again. The elderly couple with the map wandered through the rotunda, debating whether they'd missed the maritime exhibit. A janitor pushed a rolling trash bin past the marble columns. A group of students drifted in, laughing about something their professor had said. Normal things, ordinary things, but they felt paper thin, like a layer of calm stretched over something unstable beneath. I exhaled slowly and forced myself to move. If I stayed frozen any longer, I was afraid I might start imagining things worse than what I'd already heard. So I walked, back toward the galleries, back into the familiar dimness of the museum's quieter rooms. But something followed me. Not footsteps, not a presence. A feeling. A sense that the air itself had shifted. That the tourists' warnings had rearranged something in the space around me. In the Ancient Artifacts Gallery, I found myself standing in front of the same display where he had first shown such unsettling certainty. The small, ornate artifact rested behind the glass, unchanged, unmoving. The plaque beneath it described its origin, age, purpose, words that suddenly felt oddly flimsy, like a polite explanation for something the museum couldn't possibly understand. The artifact itself seemed different now that I'd heard his warnings. I'd seen it dozens of times over the years. It had never felt special to me. But now I studied it with a new kind of attention. It had a shape I found hard to describe, something between a ceremonial tool and a symbolic ornament. Old, but not simply old. Designed with purpose, etched with meaning. A fixed point, he'd called it. Something that didn't shift even when everything else did. I pressed a hand against the cool edge of the display case, unsure if the chill I felt came from the glass or from inside me. "You're staring at it like it might talk back." The voice behind me made my heart jolt. I turned quickly, half expecting to see the tourist somehow free again. But it wasn't him. A woman stood a few feet away, wearing the khaki vest of a museum staff member. Her brown hair was pulled into a neat braid, and she carried a clipboard covered in check marks. "Sorry," I said, stepping back. "I didn't mean to look suspicious." She chuckled lightly. "Everyone looks suspicious around this thing. People get weirdly attached to it, or spooked by it. I've never been sure why." Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than necessary. Not with suspicion, more with curiosity. "You're Mark, right?" she asked. My chest tightened. "How do you know that?" She raised a brow. "You volunteered here during the fall exhibit, didn't you? I remember you from last year." Relief washed through me, though it didn't untangle the knot entirely. "Right," I said. "Sorry. My mind's elsewhere today." "Yeah, I noticed." She glanced toward the restricted wing. "One of the guards said you were talking to that guy, the one they took back to the office." I swallowed. "Did they say what they're going to do with him?" She shrugged. "Probably just ask some questions and let him go. He didn't actually break any rules. He asked about the transfer schedule." I said quietly. She sighed. "People ask strange things all the time. You'd be surprised." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the tourist's voice echoed inside me. I'm here because I couldn't watch you disappear again. The staff member checked her clipboard and stepped away toward another display, leaving me alone with the artifact, still and silent behind the glass. I leaned closer. Just looking at it made something deep inside my memory flicker, like a match trying to light in a draft, as if I had seen something before, something I wasn't supposed to remember, or something a future version of me had already forgotten. And somewhere behind the sealed administrative doors, a man who knew too much was waiting, perhaps for the same moment I was starting to fear, the moment when everything would begin to shift. I didn't leave the gallery right away. Something anchored me there, as if the artifact itself had reached out and hooked a thread around my thoughts. I kept staring at the curved metal surface, the faded etchings shaped like symbols I couldn't read, but somehow felt familiar. It was strange. Before today, I'd passed by this thing dozens of times without giving it more than a glance. Now it felt charged, like it was waiting. But with every passing second, a different weight pressed into me. The tourist's warning. His insistence that in another timeline, another version of this exact day, I had stood in this same place and watched something impossible happen. Something that made me slip. Something that made me vanish. And the worst part was that none of this felt like a story someone was feeding me. It felt like a memory I hadn't lived yet. A soft beep echoed through the gallery, one of the motion sensors resetting as a visitor walked out. It snapped me out of my trance just long enough to realize I didn't want to be alone in this room anymore. I needed air. I needed a wall that didn't carry the weight of centuries. I stepped into the corridor, letting the cooler air wash over me. A few school kids ran past, laughing as their teacher tried to corral them. A middle-aged man flipped through a brochure, frowning like he was lost. Normal sounds. Normal people. So why did the world feel tilted? I headed toward the cafe near the east wing, hoping coffee and noise would anchor me to something mundane. But before I reached it, I noticed movement in one of the side halls. A guard. Not the one who'd escorted the tourist earlier. This one was younger, tense, moving quickly, but trying not to seem hurried. He held a radio near his hip, and every few steps he glanced toward the restricted wing as if unwilling to look away for long. I slowed my pace, pretending to check the map on the wall. The guard stopped just a few feet ahead, lifting the radio to his mouth. "Is he still with the supervisors?" he asked, voice low. A crackled reply. "Yes, but he's not answering their questions." The young guard exhaled sharply. "He's asking about the artifact again, and he said something about a slip. You ever heard that term before?" Static. Then, "Just keep an eye on the East Gallery. We got a report about a door sensor glitching." My stomach tightened. A door sensor, the restricted wing. The tourist had stood there earlier, watching the door as if waiting for something. I stepped closer, pretending to look at a brochure rack as the guard lowered the radio and rubbed his forehead. "Why today?" he muttered under his breath. "Why does this stuff always happen on quiet days?" Without thinking, I spoke. "What kind of stuff?" He turned sharply. "Sir, sorry. I didn't see you there." "It's fine," I said. "You mentioned a sensor? Is something wrong?" He hesitated. Not a refusal, just that subtle instinct people get when something feels slightly off and they're not sure whether to share it. "Probably nothing," he said finally. "Old buildings glitch, doors expand or contract with temperature. Most days it's boring. And today isn't." He looked down the hall again. "That man, they said he knew the transfer schedule. He described the crate it'll be moved in. Even the number printed on the side. That's not public information." A chill crept down my spine. "He said he'd been here before," I murmured. The guard nodded slowly. "Yeah, he told the supervisors the same thing. Said he was trying a different version of today." I felt my chest tighten. Did he say what was going to happen? No, but he asked where the emergency exits would be unlocked during the transfer. That's weird. I mean, if someone wanted to steal something, those are the questions they'd ask. But the tourist hadn't felt like a thief. He'd felt like someone bracing for something inevitable. The guard sighed. "Look, you don't have to worry. We've got extra staff on today, and the transfer isn't until next week. Nothing's happening now." Yet even as he spoke, his radio crackled again. "East wing sensor triggered, no visual. Check the corridor." He froze. "That's me." I followed his gaze toward the dim corridor leading to the restricted wing, the same space the tourist had stared at. like it was a doorway instead of a hallway. The guard swallowed, straightened his vest, and started walking. I should have gone the other way. I should have let him handle it alone. But something deep in my chest whispered that the tourist hadn't warned me about next week. He had warned me about today, so I followed, step by step, toward the corridor that wasn't supposed to open. And the moment the museum's air went unnaturally still, as if the building itself were listening. The corridor leading to the restricted wing was always dimmer than the rest of the museum, but that afternoon it looked different, narrower somehow, as if the shadows had thickened along the walls. The young guard walked ahead of me, trying to keep his posture confident, but I could see the tension in the way his fingers hovered near the radio clipped to his belt. Each of his steps echoed faintly. Mine followed, quieter, almost hesitant. Halfway down the hall, he slowed. A faint electronic chirp rang out, one of the door sensors resetting. "That's the one," he murmured to himself. I stood a few feet back as he approached the staff-only door. It was a heavy metal door, dull gray, with a keypad on one side and a small security camera angled downward. Everything about it screamed routine, strict access, controlled environment. But there was something wrong now, something in the air around it. The guard stepped close and inspected the keypad. "No forced entry," he said under his breath. "No logouts, no manual overrides." I didn't know what any of that meant, but the tremor in his voice told me it wasn't supposed to happen. He lifted his radio. "Control, I'm at the east corridor door. Sensor triggered, but no signs of entry. Static." Then, "Copy. Can you see anyone inside?" The guard squinted at the tiny reinforced window at the top of the door. "No movement. Looks empty." But even from where I stood, I noticed something he hadn't yet. A flicker. A soft shifting distortion in the air behind the glass. Like heat rising from pavement on a summer day. Only thinner, more delicate, as if the space itself were warping by a fraction. My pulse hammered. "Do you see that?" He glanced back at me. "See what?" "The air," I whispered. "Behind the door." He looked again, leaning close. This time he noticed it. A crease formed between his brows. Okay, that's weird. My breath caught. Because it was the same effect I'd imagined earlier. The slip, the misalignment, the breach the tourist had described. A version of the world folding, then unfolding again. "What did he say?" I asked quietly. "The tourist? About whatever happened in the version he saw." The guard shook his head. "I didn't get details. They cut me out of the conversation pretty fast." He reached toward the keypad. "Don't," I said instinctively. He paused. "It's protocol. If the sensor's malfunctioning, I have to check inside." I took a step back. "What if it's not malfunctioning?" He let out a long breath, half frustration, half nerves. "Look, the only people who can enter this wing are curators and conservation specialists, and they all clocked out an hour ago. This is just a glitch." But even as he said it, the light above the door blinked. Once, then twice. A stuttering pulse. "Okay." The guard lowered his hand. "That's not normal." The air behind the window seemed to ripple again. This time the distortion was sharper, like a thin veil being tugged gently by unseen fingers. "Maybe we should call security," I said. "I am security," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. He lifted his radio again. "Control, the east door is behaving strangely. The sensor keeps triggering. The indicator light is blinking. I'm not opening it until..." Before he could finish, the hallway lights flickered. Just once, but enough to break the rhythm of the building. Enough to make my stomach drop. The guard froze. I froze. The entire corridor felt suspended in a single breath. Then, without warning, a shadow moved behind the glass. Not a person, not a shape, a blur, like something shifting through the air, more suggestion than form, without weight, without edges. "What the?" the guard whispered. He stumbled back. I grabbed his arm, steadying him. The shadow flickered once, then vanished completely. Silence swallowed the hall. A cold heaviness settled behind my ribs. Something instinctive, primal, a recognition. I didn't know how I knew, but I was certain. Whatever had moved behind that door was not supposed to exist in this version of reality. The guard swallowed, his throat working. "We need backup. Now." But even as he spoke, the keypad beeped. A soft mechanical chirp. Lights flashing green. The lock disengaged. I felt the blood drain from my face. "No one touched it," the guard whispered. The door creaked open a few inches. A sliver of darkness slipped into the hallway like spilled ink. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something on the other side. A shape, not human, not object, a fold in the air, as if the room itself were bending inward. I staggered back. The guard dropped his radio. And the museum, my familiar refuge, felt suddenly like the wrong place entirely. Like I had stepped into the exact moment the tourist had tried to prevent. The door eased open another inch, as if an invisible hand were testing the threshold. The guard took a step forward, reflex more than intention, then immediately stepped back again, palms lifting in the universal gesture of, "I don't want anything to do with that. Stay behind me," he whispered, though the tremor in his voice made it clear he wasn't sure staying anywhere near the door was a good idea. But we didn't move, neither toward it nor away. We hovered in that fragile space where fear and disbelief hold each other in balance. A low hum began to build from inside the restricted wing. Not mechanical, not electrical. Something subtler, almost like the vibration you feel before a train arrives in the distance. Felt through the bones rather than the ears. My skin prickled. The guard's breath hitched. Then, from the sliver of darkness, the air folded inward again. Just slightly. Just enough to see it. It looked like a wrinkle in space. Not a shadow. Not a person. A distortion, like the museum interior was being viewed through a curved lens, warping gently, impossibly, concaving in on itself. My instincts screamed to run, but another instinct, deeper and colder, told me that turning my back on it would be worse. The guard fumbled for his radio on the floor. His fingers shook as he pressed the button. Control, control, the east wing door just unlocked on its own. "There's something inside, I don't know what I'm looking at." A crackle of static, voices overlapping. Someone tried to respond, but the feed cut in and out, fragmented beyond comprehension. Something shifted again behind the door, this time with a faint metallic ping, like a piece of equipment being nudged. Then another, a soft shuffle, too deliberate to be the building settling. "Someone's in there," the guard whispered, though it didn't sound like he believed his own words. The hum deepened. The distortion thickened. I felt pressure build behind my eyes, like a migraine blooming too fast. The hallway seemed to stretch, as if the museum were lengthening around us. "This is what he meant," I said before I could stop myself. The guard shot me a glance. "What? Who meant?" "The tourist," I whispered. "He said this day had another version. He said I disappeared." "Well, you're not disappearing today," the guard muttered, though every syllable shook. "We're backing out, okay? Slowly. Just step away." But as soon as we took a single step, something inside the room answered. A soft click, like a latch being lifted, then a faint metallic drag. My breath froze. The guard's eyes widened. "That's the transport table," he said, "for the artifact crates." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The tourist's words echoed in my memory. "It's not the artifact that matters. It's what moves with it." The guard leaned forward slightly, trying to see through the narrow opening. "Hello?" he called out, voice wavering. "Is anyone in there?" The hum stopped. The air went still, utterly still. In that frozen silence, the guard pushed the door open another inch with two trembling fingers. The hinges groaned softly. Inside, the restricted room was darker than it should have been. The overhead lights flickered weakly, casting long, broken shadows across stacked crates and sealed cabinets. But the distortion remained. A subtle ripple, floating near the center of the room like a heat mirage suspended in midair. It pulsed, once, twice, a slow rhythmic breathing of space itself. The guard sucked in a tight breath, his composure slipping. Okay, we're leaving. Right now." But as we turned to step away, the distortion expanded, quietly, smoothly, spreading like a circular wave. And for a single heartbeat, I saw inside it. Not the room, not the museum. Something else. A fragment of a landscape I didn't recognize. Ruins maybe, or distant lights, or silhouettes that didn't move like people. Then it snapped closed. I staggered backward, heart pounding wildly. The guard grabbed my arm, eyes wide with terror. "We have to go," he hissed. "I'm not dealing with that alone." We retreated quickly down the corridor, the air behind us crackling like static with every step. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I did, I might see the distortion following us. crawling out of the door like a second shadow. Only when we reached the rotunda again did the guard stop, chest rising and falling in shaky breaths. He pressed his palms against his knees, trying to steady himself. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. Because deep down, beneath the fear, I felt a single horrifying certainty settling into place. Whatever we had just witnessed, whatever had unfolded behind that door, was the reason the tourist had come back, and it hadn't reached its final moment yet. The guard radioed for backup 3 times before anyone answered. His voice trembled, but he tried to sound authoritative, like someone who hadn't just stared into a distortion in the fabric of a locked room. The replies came fragmented through static, as if the museum's signals were struggling to move through the air the same way we were. "Control to East Wing. Repeat your status." The guard swallowed, pressed the button harder. "There's an unauthorized access in the restricted room." Door opened on its own. "We need immediate..." The radio cut out, just like before. He stared at the device in his hand, then at the hallway we'd fled from. I could see his pulse pounding visibly along his neck. "Something's interfering with the frequency," he muttered. "That room doesn't have wireless dead zones. There's no reason this should be happening." But we both knew reason left the building the moment the door opened itself. A pair of visitors walked past us, completely unaware of the panic lying just a hallway away. The museum looked normal again, sunlight filtering through the skylights, muted voices drifting between galleries, footsteps soft against the marble floor. It felt absurd, unfair, like stepping out of a nightmare into a postcard of calm. The guard straightened suddenly, as if remembering his responsibilities. "Stay here," he said. "If something happens, call for help. I'm going to find another officer." "I'm not staying alone," I replied. He didn't argue. There was no room for ego, not after what we saw. We moved toward the security desk together. The guard walked fast, head swiveling, scanning every corridor. I kept pace behind him, eyes darting toward every display case, every doorway, every shadow that lingered longer than it should. When we reached the front security desk, we found 2 officers standing there, mid-conversation with a staff supervisor. The guard stepped forward immediately, speaking in a rushed whisper meant only for them. But the moment he described what happened, the air distortion, the door unlocking, the shape we saw, the officers' faces tightened, not with disbelief, with recognition. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman with clipped sentences and a sharp posture, dismissed 2 nearby visitors before turning to us. "Start again," she said carefully. "From the beginning." The guard recounted everything. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't hesitate. He told it plainly. The sensor glitch, the flickering lights, the air bending like a thin sheet of metal under pressure. He even mentioned the tourist from earlier. When he finished, the supervisor exhaled in a slow, contained breath. "Come with me," she said. But she wasn't talking to him. She was talking to me. I blinked. "Me? You were with the visitor earlier, correct?" My heart tightened. "Yes." "And you were present during the corridor incident?" Yes." She nodded once. Decision firm. "Then I need to speak with you privately." The guard looked uneasy. "Shouldn't we all—" "No," she interrupted, glancing at him before looking back at me. "Just him." That word lodged in my mind again. Him, not you both, not the witnesses, just me. My throat dried. "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she exchanged a meaningful look with the 2 officers. The kind of look people share when something too complicated, or too dangerous, to explain in public is unfolding. "Because," she said quietly, "you may have been involved in a previous event." Ice crawled through my veins. "What event?" Her expression remained unreadable. "We don't fully understand it, but there was an incident several years ago involving an anomaly in the East Wing. Someone saw something they shouldn't have. Someone experienced what you described." My pulse quickened. "And what happened to them?" The supervisor's jaw tightened. "They disappeared." The word struck me like a blow, echoing the tourist's warning with perfect precision. The guard beside me shifted uncomfortably. "You're saying this has happened before?" "Yes," the supervisor replied. Not in the exact same way, but close enough. I swallowed hard, a cold clarity crystallizing inside me. The tourist wasn't lying. He wasn't confused. He wasn't imagining a version of the day that never existed. He had seen it. He had lived it. And someone else, someone here, had seen it too. The supervisor motioned down the hallway. "Please, we need to talk before anything else happens." For a moment I stood frozen, caught between the instinct to run and the need to understand. But something deeper overrode both, a quiet certainty settling in my chest, as if my footsteps were already laid out before me. I followed her, not because I trusted her, not because I wanted answers, but because the tourist had been right about one thing. I was always going to be here, in every version of the day, standing too close to a moment that didn't stay the same. She led me down a side hallway I'd never noticed before, narrow, unadorned, used mostly by staff. The walls were lined with bulletin boards filled with schedules, maintenance logs, lists of upcoming exhibits. Everything appeared ordinary at first glance, but the fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, flickering every few seconds like they were straining under a weight I couldn't name. The supervisor walked briskly, glancing back only once to make sure I was keeping up. Her shoes clicked sharply against the floor, a steady rhythm that made my heartbeat feel even more erratic by contrast. We reached a small office tucked behind an emergency exit. She opened the door and gestured for me to enter. Inside was a simple room. Desk, filing cabinets, a radio set, and a wall of security monitors showing various views of the museum. Except, one of the screens showed the restricted wing, and the distortion was still there. It pulsed faintly, widening and contracting in a rhythm that didn't feel mechanical. It felt alive, or at least, aware. The supervisor noticed me staring. "We've been watching that for 10 minutes, she said quietly. "It shouldn't be there. The room should be stable." "Stable?" I echoed, stepping closer to the monitor. "Temperature controlled, pressure controlled, humidity regulated. Nothing should distort inside that room." She tapped the screen lightly. "And nothing should move like that." She pulled the door shut behind us and locked it. A chill traveled down my spine. "Why lock the door?" "So no one interrupts," she replied. "And so you don't leave before I explain what we know." I sat reluctantly in the chair across from her desk. The room felt constricting, the air too still, like the museum itself was holding its breath. She took a seat beside the monitors, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm going to ask you something that may sound strange, but I need you to answer honestly." I nodded, though I wasn't sure honesty was something I could trust anymore. Not from myself, not from the world around me. Did the visitor say anything about previous occurrences? My pulse jumped. He said he'd been here before. Not just in the normal sense. He talked about versions of the day. Her face didn't shift. She didn't look confused or skeptical. If anything, she looked resigned. "That aligns with what we've documented," she said. "Documented?" I leaned forward. "You're saying this has happened before? Exactly this?" "No," she said. "Not exactly, but close." She opened a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. It looked old, edges worn, paper yellowed. She slid it toward me. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, all printed from grainy cameras scattered throughout the museum. Most were mundane, visitors, staff, empty hallways. But one photo made my breath catch. A figure stood outside the restricted wing, alone, face turned away from the camera, body angled just like the tourist had stood when I found him earlier. The timestamp read, October 1989. I felt the world tilt slightly. "Is that him?" "We think so," she said. "The resemblance is strong. Same build, same posture. And," she tapped another photo, "he appears again 3 months later, in January, and again in April. But the odd part is this." She pulled out a final sheet, a written report, brief and clinical. Eyewitness claims the figure disappeared upon entering the restricted wing. No sign of forced entry. Artifact status unchanged. No explanation found. The date, April 12th, 1990. My hands went cold. A shiver rippled through me. "He said someone vanished," I whispered. "He said I vanished." The supervisor's expression darkened. "We never confirmed the identity of the person who disappeared, but we know a visitor reported something similar. An anomaly he claims he witnessed before losing consciousness." "And what happened to him?" I asked. She hesitated. "He left Boston immediately. He refused to step inside another museum again. When one of our security officers tried to follow up with him a year later, he was gone. No forwarding address, no family." "Missing?" I asked. "Not officially, but unofficially, yes." I swallowed, throat tight. Every puzzle piece was clicking into place in the worst possible way. The tourist wasn't predicting the future, he was remembering it. And now, sitting in this tiny office with a supervisor who seemed to know far more than she wanted to admit, I realized something even more unsettling. This wasn't an isolated glitch. This wasn't an accident. This was a recurrence, a loop, a fold that kept pulling someone in. And this time, it had found me. I sat frozen, the folder still open in my lap, its pages feeling heavier than paper had any right to. The supervisor watched me with a quiet intensity, the kind you reserve for someone standing on the edge of something dangerous, something they don't fully understand yet. "You said this happened before," I murmured. "But why me? Why now?" She didn't answer right away. She stood, crossed the room, and adjusted the monitor showing the restricted wing. The distortion had grown, not larger exactly, but more defined. Its edges pulsed with a faint shimmer, like the air was being stretched. "It's never the same person twice," she said at last. "That's the part that scares us." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" She exhaled. "Different witnesses, different years, but always the same pattern. Someone stands too close to the restricted wing during a disturbance, and they change, disappear, reappear, lose time, describe places that don't exist." She rubbed her temples. "And one case involved a person claiming to have spoken with their future self." A heavy silence settled between us. "And the artifact?" I asked. "Is it linked to all this?" She hesitated. "We don't know, but every incident involves that room. And every time, the artifact was scheduled to be moved." My breath caught. "Just like next week?" "Yes." I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. My mind raced through the tourist's warnings, the distortion, the guard's fear, the supervisor's file of unexplained appearances. Everything pointed to a single truth. Whatever was happening wasn't random, and the artifact wasn't just a museum piece. The supervisor sat again, her voice low. "Mark, did the visitor tell you anything about previous events? Anything very specific?" I hesitated. I thought of the tourist's expression, calm, sorrowful, and the way he'd said he'd watched me disappear before. He hadn't said it with drama. He said it like a man stating a memory that haunted him. "He said," I whispered, "that he saw a version of me vanish." She closed her eyes for a moment as if bracing herself. "I was afraid you'd say something like that." A chill crawled over my skin. "Why?" "Because we've heard similar phrases," she replied, "from witnesses, before something happened." Something inside me twisted. Not fear exactly, something deeper. Recognition. Like a memory I wasn't sure I had the right to claim. "I don't understand any of this," I said softly. "But that man, he acted like he'd lived this day more than once. Like he came back to change it." Her gaze sharpened. "Mark, do you believe him?" I didn't expect the answer to come so easily, but it did. "Yes." She didn't argue, she didn't laugh, she didn't even blink. She just nodded slowly as if accepting something she'd already suspected. "We need to move you," she said. "Away from the wing, away from the artifact, away from where the disturbance is centered. But if I leave, then you break the pattern." Her voice was firm, almost urgent. "We can't afford another case like the ones in this file." I looked at the grainy photos again. The figure standing alone, the timestamp, the report of someone vanishing. A tightness grew in my chest. "Do you think he's trying to stop this from happening?" The supervisor paused. "I don't know what he's trying to stop, but people don't return to moments like this without a reason." She stood again. "We need to get you someplace safe." Safe. The word sounded meaningless now. Before I could answer, the radio on her desk crackled violently. "Supervisor Hart, do you copy? There's something, East Wing." The transmission warped, like a tape being pulled too tight. Then a second voice, shaken, breathless. "Something's moving, inside the room. I don't know what I'm seeing. Hart, we need you, now." The distortion on the monitor pulsed violently, expanding and contracting in sharp jolts. The supervisor grabbed her keys. "We have to go." "Go where?" I asked, rising to my feet. "To the East Wing, now." "But you just said—" "I know what I said." Her voice trembled for the first time. "But whatever's happening, whatever the visitor warned you about, it's starting." She yanked the door open. The hallway outside flickered with unstable light, and somewhere down the corridor the air let out a deep, low groan, like the museum itself was twisting. She grabbed my wrist. "Mark, it's already happening." The hallway outside the small office felt wrong the moment we stepped into it. The air had a weight to it, thick, slow, like walking into a room where someone had just whispered your name and vanished. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their glow uneven and trembling, as if flickering to a rhythm we couldn't hear. Supervisor Hart tightened her grip on my wrist, not enough to hurt, but enough to tell me she wasn't giving me a choice. "Stay close," she said. Her voice was steadier than before, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She was terrified. We moved quickly down the hallway, the sound of our footsteps tapping out an uneasy cadence. Every few seconds the lights flickered again. Once, twice, then steadied in a washed-out glow that made our shadows stretch unnaturally long along the floor. A low vibration hummed through the walls, subtle at first, then growing stronger, like a distant engine or a pressure change. It didn't feel mechanical. It felt alive. Hart's radio crackled violently at her hip. "Copy? Hart, can't stay, don't let him—" A harsh burst of static cut the message in half. Hart cursed under her breath. "We're losing internal comms." "Because of the distortion?" I asked. "No," she said, picking up speed. "Because whatever's happening in that room is spreading." My stomach nodded, but I kept moving. A strange clarity had settled over me. Fear sharpened into focus, not panic. I felt hyper-aware of every sound, every breath, every shift in the hallway. Like the smallest detail mattered. We reached the turn that led toward the restricted wing. The moment we stepped around the corner, I froze. The corridor looked different. Not dramatically. Not like a movie where walls twist and floors tilt. But enough. The floor tiles, the same marble slabs I'd walked 100 times, were slightly misaligned. Barely perceptible, maybe a centimeter off their normal pattern, like someone had lifted the entire hallway and set it back down wrong. Hart noticed it too. "Oh God, it's starting earlier than last time." Last time. The words hit me like a cold wave. "You've seen this?" She slowed, not stopping but moving more cautiously. Not myself, but one of the reports described it. The floor shifting by a fraction, the architecture doubling for a second. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Doubling?" She nodded. "Like a ghost image of the building overlapping with the real one. Not supernatural, structural confusion in space-time. The distortion had spilled out of the room. The building was beginning to buckle at the edges of reality. We were still 20 feet from the staff-only door when the lights above it flickered violently. Once, twice, then burst into a stuttering white pulse. The air above the threshold shimmered, bending like heat, the same way I'd seen before. And something else. A sound. Faint. A dragging noise. Metal on stone. Slow. Deliberate. Hart stopped dead in her tracks. "That's the moving platform," she whispered. "The one they use for the artifact crate. But no one should be touching it." "Is the artifact in there now?" I asked. "No," she answered. "Not until the transfer next week." "Then why was the platform moving?" A chill crawled up my spine. The corridor lights dimmed, then surged bright again, flooding the hall in a washed-out glow. Shadows stretched toward us like dark ribbons. A voice crackled from Hart's radio, distorted, broken. "Hart, don't bring him here." Static swallowed the rest. For a moment, Hart didn't move. Her face went pale. Her breathing quickened. Then she spun toward me. "Mark, listen to me. We need to get you out of this wing. Now." But before she could turn me around, a burst of light flickered at the end of the hall. Not from the lamps, from the air itself. A split-second flare, white, thin, sharp, like a seam opening and snapping shut again. I staggered back. "What was that?" Hart grabbed my shoulders. "A fracture." The world tilted, just for a heartbeat, like gravity shifted sideways. The floor straightened again, but I felt the echo of the tilt inside my bones. An aftershock of a movement the world shouldn't make. "Mark," Hart said, her voice low and trembling. "If this progresses to a full fold—" She didn't finish, because something moved behind the staff-only door. A silhouette, or the echo of one. Not a person, not quite. A shape bent in ways a body shouldn't bend, flickering at the edges, as if existing in two versions of itself at once. The door creaked open another inch, and the distortion swelled like a breath being taken in. Run, Hart whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the entire weight of her fear. Mark, run. I didn't think. I just reacted. My feet hit the marble floor before my mind could register the movement. Hart shoved me from behind, forcing momentum into my first steps as the distortion behind us expanded with a low, rumbling pressure that made the air taste metallic. The corridor warped again, subtle but undeniable. For a split second, the left wall doubled, like a faint afterimage out of sync with reality. Hart cursed under her breath and grabbed my wrist to keep us moving. "Don't look back," she snapped. But of course I did. The door to the restricted wing had opened wider, and the shape, whatever it was, leaned forward. Not walking, not crawling. Falling almost, as if gravity inside the fracture behaved differently. Its outline flickered in stuttering frames. There, not there, there again, like a failing film reel trying to keep up. My lungs seized. Something primal in me recognized danger long before logic could catch up. We turned the corner sharply. The corridor here was brighter, steadier, but the hum followed us, low, pulsing, like a heartbeat echoing from inside stone walls. Visitors walked past, calm and unaware, as if we weren't running for our lives. I must have looked unhinged, wide-eyed, breathless, but no one reacted. It was as if the distortion had isolated us from the rest of the museum, like a storm cloud drifting over only two people. "Hart," I gasped. "What is it? What came through that door?" "Not came through," she said, pulling me toward a stairwell. "It's trying to stabilize. It's trying to form." "What does that mean?" She yanked open the stairwell door. The sound echoed too loudly, metallic, hollow, wrong. "It means," she said, "that the fracture is big enough now for things on the other side of the fold to bleed into this timeline." I stopped on the steps. "Things? What things?" She turned to me sharply, breath trembling. "We don't know. No one ever saw one long enough to describe it." The lights above us flickered again. Once, twice. Then the stairwell shook, not violently, but with a single jolt, like something massive had brushed against the foundation from the inside. Hart's eyes widened. "That's not good." She pulled me down the stairs, nearly stumbling as the rail vibrated under her grip. My mind raced back to the tourist, to his calm voice, his steady eyes, his warnings spoken like memories. In one version of this day, you saw something you weren't meant to see. In another, you ran. Which version was this? Which version was I living now? The stairwell door below us slammed open. We froze on the steps. A guard rushed in, one I hadn't seen before. He looked rattled, face pale, hair disheveled. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Hart!" he gasped. The cameras, every feed near the east wing is glitching, distorted, corrupted, like something's rewriting the image. "What about the supervisors?" she asked. Not answering comms. "We can't reach anyone inside admin." Hart swore under her breath. "Where's Jennings?" The guard hesitated, eyes darting. He saw something. He's not responding. He's staring at the wall like he's frozen." A cold spike ran through my spine. Hart steadied herself. "We need to evacuate the building. Quietly. We can't risk a panic." But the guard shook his head violently. "You don't get it. The distortion is spreading. It's running through the electrical lines. If we let people crowd the exits, they might walk into it." Hart grabbed the railing. "Then what do you suggest?" Before he could answer, a faint echo drifted down the stairwell, the same dragging metal sound we'd heard in the corridor. Hart's expression hardened. "Up," she said. "Top floor, now." We ran. The steps blurred beneath my feet. The hum vibrated through the building like it was alive, like the museum itself was groaning under a pressure it was never meant to bear. Halfway up, a flicker appeared above us, a vertical line of light suspended in the air, thin and sharp like a tear in reality. Hart grabbed my jacket, ripped me sideways against the wall. The guard nearly slipped down the stairs. The seam of light pulsed once, then snapped shut. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. What was that?" the guard stuttered. Hart swallowed hard. "A microfracture." The guard turned to me, eyes wide and terrified. "Is this what that man meant?" he whispered. "Is this what he said would happen?" I didn't know how to answer, because deep inside my chest, something told me the fracture wasn't looking for the museum. It was looking for me. We reached the top floor panting, the guard's footsteps uneven behind us. Hart pushed through a maintenance door that led into a long storage corridor, dimly lit, cluttered with old exhibit pieces under dust covers. The air up here felt stale, unmoving, like the museum's heartbeat hadn't reached this far in years. Hart turned to the guard. "Seal the stairwell door." He didn't question her. He slammed it shut, twisted the manual bolt, and stepped back, chest heaving. For a moment, the three of us just stood there, listening. No footsteps, no dragging noises, no distortions forming in the air, just silence. But silence, I was beginning to learn, didn't mean safety. Hart leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "We've bought seconds, not minutes. That thing, or whatever the distortion is, won't behave like a person. If it tries to rise through the floors, this won't stop it." The guard wiped sweat from his forehead. "Hart, what exactly are we dealing with?" She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Not because she didn't want to tell him, because she didn't know. I stepped forward. "The tourist said the artifact is a fixed point. When it moves, a breach forms." Hart nodded slowly. "That's one interpretation. He also said the breach connects timelines," I continued. "Versions of the day, versions of events." The guard stared at me. "What tourist?" I hesitated, glancing at Hart. She inhaled sharply. "It's not important right now." But I couldn't let it go. Not anymore. "It is important," I said. "He said he'd seen me vanish before. He said this moment had happened, more than once." Hart closed her eyes. "Mark, he came back to change something," I insisted. "Something that happens today. Something about me." The guard's voice cracked. "Are you saying this thing, this distortion, is following you?" I didn't want to answer, because I didn't want it to be true. But the air shifted, just slightly, like a breath being drawn in the space between beats. And I knew. "It's not following me," I whispered. "It's converging on a moment, and I'm standing inside it." The corridor lights flickered. Hart straightened instantly. "We need to keep moving, now." She led us deeper into the storage wing. Dusty frames and rolled canvases towered on either side of the narrow path. Forgotten exhibits cast long, warped shadows on the floor. Halfway through the corridor, Hart stopped abruptly. The guard almost bumped into her. "What?" She pointed. A thin sliver of vertical light hung in the air a few feet ahead, almost invisible until you looked directly at it. A seam, a fracture, smaller than the one downstairs, but unmistakable. Its edges shimmered faintly, like a thread being pulled tight. The guard took a step back, voice trembling. "It's up here too." Hart grabbed his arm. "Don't move. Whatever you do, don't touch it." We skirted around it slowly, pressed shoulder to wall. As we passed, I heard something faint, like a whisper leaking through the seam, a voice too distorted to understand, yet strangely familiar. My own. Hart noticed the way I shivered. "You heard something?" I swallowed. I think I heard myself." She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed my sleeve and pulled harder. We hurried through the remainder of the storage hall until we reached a service elevator. Hart pressed the call button repeatedly. The guard looked pale, eyes flicking nervously back down the corridor. "What if it comes up after us? What if it's already—" A loud metallic crack cut him off. We all turned. Halfway down the corridor, the seam of light widened. Not by much, but enough. Enough for the shadows near it to warp sideways, as if pulled toward it. Enough for the air to bend, the same concave ripple we saw earlier. Enough for something to push against the boundary of our reality. "I don't think we should wait for the elevator," I said, voice barely steady. Hart agreed. "Stairs. The stairs are where it came from," the guard snapped. Hart made a split-second decision. "Roof access. This way." She led us to a metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The lock required a key. She jammed one in, turned it, and shoved the door open. A gust of cold rooftop air swept in, the first real breath of the outside world since the nightmare began. "Hart," the guard whispered, staring at the corridor behind us. "It's getting bigger." She grabbed my wrist. "Go, now." We ran up the last flight of steps, the metal door echoing behind us as we reached the rooftop under the pale, washed-out Boston sky. For a moment, everything was quiet, still, almost normal. Then, from below us, deep inside the museum's walls, a low, resonant groan rolled upward through the building. Not mechanical, not structural. Something else. Something that knew exactly where I was. The wind on the rooftop carried a coldness that felt older than the city below it. I stood near the ledge, breathing hard, watching the museum's skylights tremble with faint pulses of light from the distortion spreading somewhere deep inside. Hart and the guard stayed close, both pale, both shaken in ways I don't think training could ever prepare someone for. For a moment, the world felt divided into layers. Boston beneath us, familiar and unchanged, and something else beneath that, shifting quietly, folding into the day like a memory trying to rewrite itself. Hart kept her eyes on the rooftop door. "It won't follow us up here," she said, though her voice barely carried conviction. "Fractures stabilize closer to fixed points. You're safer away from the artifact." Safer. The word felt fragile. I stepped back from the ledge, trying to steady my breathing. The cold air stung my lungs, but it also cleared my thoughts enough for a question to surface, one that had been circling me since morning. "What happens now?" I asked. Hart didn't answer right away. She looked at me with the same expression the tourist had worn hours earlier, something between regret and inevitability. "We contain the breach if we can," she finally said. "We shut down the wing. We seal the room. And you—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "You try to live your life away from places like this." The guard shifted nervously, as if unsure whether that was advice or a warning. I thought of the tourist then, his calm voice, his tired eyes, the way he'd watched me like a man standing at the edge of a memory he couldn't change. He had tried to stop this. He had come back for a reason. Maybe he succeeded, or maybe he only delayed what always happens. As we waited for emergency responders, the museum groaned again beneath our feet. A quiet, resonant sound, like something settling back into place, or preparing to return. Either way, the day had ended, but whatever had reached for me inside that corridor, I knew it hadn't finished its story yet.